My name is Aaron Couch. I am excited to present today to CMS Philly. Again, my topic is Wait, we can reuse this. Design systems and component libraries for fun and profit. Let's get started. A little bit about me. I haven't done this before, but I've been in the community long enough that I can do some before and after pics. So this was me when I just first started getting involved in the Drupal and WordPress communities in 2008. You can see, look at that hairline. I'm reminiscing a little bit, but this was at the ZivTech opening party, which was this is another really great Drupal open source shop in Philly. This is me now. I live in Roxborough with a wonderful partner and a almost 5-year-old. So yeah, it's been at least 10 years, maybe more. At some point, you don't want to count too accurately. So I'm working right now for a company called Promet Source, and that's another longtime Drupal community member, founded in 2004, headquartered in Chicago. We're distributed all across the country, and they've even got a team in the Philippines. And it wouldn't be a presentation if we didn't share the wall of clients. You'll notice these are a lot of government and Promet Source, like a lot of the Drupal community, gets a lot of work for government. Drupal is such a great tool for government. And I really like myself working on behalf of government clients because of the values and the kind of the free tools that we can leverage for governments. So why are we here today? We want to reuse more items across projects. We often waste time and resources recreating similar things over and over. We want to improve the tooling for, we want to not only reuse, but improve the tooling for that reuse. We want to use design systems and build component libraries for our own process, but ultimately on behalf of the client. We want to deliver projects faster, and we want to work it harder, better, faster, stronger. So the audience for today's talk, again, it's a little unusual for me to be doing this virtually. I've actually given a talk previously at back when this was Drupal Camp, and I've given a lot of kind of talks over the years. So typically there, folks will leave the room at some point or can kind of shuffle out. So if, but this is what we're, this is our audience, this is the audience that this is focused on. So this is not just for coders. This is for folks that might have a little bit of experience with component libraries, are new to component libraries. If you have an interest in fostering examples around their use, that's something that I'm hoping we can get out of today and in the future. And this is mostly Drupal focused, but the tooling that we're using is applicable to WordPress as well. So let's start off with some nouns. We're going to look at briefly what a design system is. We're going to look at how a component library is different than a design system. We're going to look at Emulsify, which is a tool that we use and I would highly recommend for deploying design systems. And we're going to be dealing with some Drupal blocks and the Drupal layout builder. So what is a design system? A design system is not just a component library. or it's not just a methodology, it's the combination of all of the tools that come together to create a reusable guide for standards that can be used across different projects and can be used in different contexts and can complement and extend the vision of a brand. A design system is a source of truth. It's a common language. It's often really hard to figure out what something's called, or what something really is when we're talking about assets that are used in so many different contexts, from design to development to the user experience, and they're a source of documentation for these items. The atomic design is a methodology for creating design systems. There's a lot of different methodologies. I would say as long as you are adopting one, you're doing a lot better than if you're not. Atomic design is one that it was one of the first to kind of popularize this idea, and is pretty simple to adopt and implement. Briefly, what atomic design is you take the smallest component parts of a project, these are, and break those into atoms. Here are some atoms: an input field, a search button. Those are built up into molecules, and molecules are placed into organisms. On top of that are page templates, and there's a couple of other bigger assets, but this is the long and short of it. So what is a component library? A component library, you can think of it as a place to store your components, a living toolbox. I like to think of it as a tool that enables people to leverage these methodologies. I wanted to share my favorite library, which is Lovett and Mount Airy. And hopefully at the end of this talk, the idea of a component library will give you the same warm and fuzzy feeling that you get from stepping into your favorite library. There's a lot of different tools that you can use in order to maintain a component library. This styleguides.io has about 150 listed, excuse me. And on the Drupal end, there's a really great resource here on component-based theming that has lists of themes that are using component-based methodologies, and is a great resource. So the component library that we're leveraging ourselves is called Storybook.js. This component tool we've broken out into the atoms, molecules, and organisms that are part of the atomic design methodology. And this is this tool is really amazing because it's a living version of your design system that people can and just start to QA some of the items that you're putting together as you are building out your component library. Lastly, Emulsify is a both a Drupal and WordPress theme that is a real, for us, has been a real stepping stone in order to be able to adopt component libraries. And Yeah, so it does two things that are super useful. One is it kind of lays the foundation for a component library setup, which I'll show in a second. And then it creates an integration with that component library tool. And again, they have themes for both Drupal and WordPress. So what does that look like? Within the theme, Emulsify contains a component library. That's placed into a component folder. You can see the atoms, molecules, organisms. The templates and pages are the other bigger parts of the component, the atomic design tooling. So it sets those up. It gives you the a lot of the basic type of components that you'd like, and then it marries those to the templates that you typically use for either Drupal or WordPress theming. So out of the box, you've got the tooling that you need to get going. Additionally, within the templates that either Drupal or WordPress are using, Emulsify and the other Drupal and WordPress themes that are utilizing a component-based system. So this is what it looks like in a template. So instead of doing all of the kind of CSS and attribute setups that you would expect in a template, you're able to just reuse what was created in the component system by, in this case, just including it. So those are the tools. Let's take a step back and and look at the story. Every good story needs some heroes, and everyone thinks they're the hero of their own story. So we are part of a large, so Promise Source is a large distributed team of 50+ people. We have a lot of overlap around clients, especially, you saw the earlier slide with the government. That was more of a government focused slide, but there's a lot of universities and some of the, even some of the private companies, there's overlap in the goals that they have. We're often using similar designs. We have a really strong design team that doesn't try and reinvent the wheel every time. We often use similar components, those kind of banners, carousels, groups of images, et cetera, et cetera. This might sound familiar to you, as you know, so much of the web at this point is using and reusing similar pieces across contexts. So you've got a new client. That's the the open field, the new possibilities. The design team's excited about utilizing some new things that they've seen. The development team has a little bit new of a new opportunity to use some cool tool or methodology or something. You've got a new style guide. You've got a new set of blocks and menu. The components that we've seen over and over. And we've gone through a series of new clients in the past quarter, and we've kind of started to actually realize that, hey, don't some of these things look kind of familiar? Maybe this isn't just a new approach after all. And our this is Mindy, our design director, asked the simple question: Can we just reuse what we did last time? We just created a bunch of these components. Can't we just reuse them? And yeah, you saw the picture of the now 4-year-old. I've been watching a lot of Winnie the Pooh lately, and that sometimes a simple question or just the right question can kind of set you down the right path. So sure, we can reuse this stuff. Like why not? Let's take a look at a carousel component. This is something that we should be able to reuse. Digging into, so this carousel component has the same kind of similar things that you would see in most carousels. It's got a JavaScript element, it's got cards, images, etc. It's not rocket science. In a recent project, we dug into reusing something like that, and we found that it was actually more difficult than we had anticipated or wanted. The CSS is in a file that is is part of the paragraph bundle. So paragraphs, if you're not familiar with Drupal, are a common kind of block component. In the template was somewhere else that was actually kind of hard to find too, and is also locked into this kind of definition of a paragraph. And then the JavaScript was bundled with the other components. And so with each of these, we found that this is going to take a little bit of work to repurpose this. So Drupal has a couple strategies for use. There's the modules, the theme layer that pulls together the templates, the JavaScript, the CSS. Obviously, modules can leverage that too, and that can be a strategy for use. There's the data model, the content types and entities. Clients often have similar ones. Drupal comes bundled with the page or article. That seems like a candidate for use. And then Drupal especially has a really robust and sophisticated configuration management system that in Drupal 8 I would say is pretty amazing. But that's a place where a lot of that is stored. With Drupal modules, and especially looking at components, there are some useful modules. View Slideshow does a great job of offering configuration and utility. There's a Bootstrap simple carousel if you're interested in the carousel. Each one of the problem with these modules is that each one does something slightly different, and they're not always flexible. So View Slideshow, for example, relies on views. What if you're not using views, or you're not even sure at the beginning of a project if a client wants a list of content or to kind of click together their own content? So the front-end methodology for or like the decision to utilize View Slideshow depends on feedback that you might not get till the end of the project. So that's a kind of a limitation with Drupal themes or Drupal modules, kind of in our context. Drupal themes are often a direct representation of the internal data structures, as we saw. Like if you're using paragraphs, you make a paragraph template. If you're using blocks, or if you're updating a field, that logic is stored in the field template. So that can be limiting if there's any kind of if you're changing the Drupal structure, then the theme reusability starts to fall apart. And then Drupal themes often on their own try and solve this by adopting a framework or methodologies themselves. So a Drupal theme will also try and solve a lot of problems by using Bootstrap or Foundation, or have kind of a different strategy around organizing the templates based off of kind of its own specific history. So here you can kind of get locked into using the same base theme, and that's a limitation. In terms of the data model, that's the stuff that we most often in our case want to change. Clients want their own fields. They want, there's often a lot of overlap, but almost invariably they have some kind of content type that's different. They have something about their implementation that's different. And once you start to change fields or reference another content type with a field, you start to kind of bundle stuff in a way that is really hard to kind of abstract. And then the Drupal config, as I mentioned, is really awesome. Like I'm really, I'm someone who's, as you saw, stuck through with Drupal for a lot of the long haul, and I think they've done a great job with it. I think it's a great tool, but it's all bundled, all the config is bundled together, and you almost need a different strategy for that, and that's maybe a different talk. So with looking at our clients again, we found that, okay, so the content types, there's not a ton of overlap. Each client has a kind of a different integration or functionality that they need. But these common components are the things that we just keep recreating, and are things that almost every client wants, with like similar with slight differences. So this is a Anchorman reference. If you don't get it, or if you're not a fan, you hopefully will still get the slide. Luckily, the front-end community in general, there's a big Drupal components community. The Emulsify folks, a lot of people have been working on this, and there's really not a better time to start leveraging these tools and these approaches as now. So they've they've been working, and we can start to take advantage of that. So what does it look like to start to leverage a component based theming tool? So this is a picture of one of the components. This is actually the 3-item carousel that you saw earlier, and this is what it looks like in the components folder. So we've called it kind of a group, and the thing that you can hopefully see right away is that the JavaScript, the template, and the Sass files are all connected to are all in the same place, and this YAML file is dummy data that we're feeding into it for the component library. So this right here is where we're getting this from. So right away with this approach, logically we have everything together. So if we wanted to reuse this, and we haven't created too many dependencies, and in this case we haven't, you can copy paste this into a different context. So that's this is what it looks like in the components folder in this Storybook tool. Here it's got some dummy content and data, but it's got the full functionality. The JavaScript. If I were to change the viewport, you'd get to preview all of the responsive elements, and there's some other tools here, including ability to change settings, and it does an accessibility check. So already we're able to leverage what's in here. In terms of leveraging that within Drupal, we're back to doing things the Drupal way. Instead of paragraphs here, we're using blocks, and we're kind of tied to the literal namespace that the Drupal structure has created. However, instead of putting all our logic into this template, and instead of kind of similarly doing that with the other front end pieces, we're creating this, but then we're embedding, in this case, the component that you just saw. So in terms of reusability, to reuse this on a future project, we need to just bring over the component library and then plug it into the right place in Drupal. So we saw that. So we have a new workflow now. The designers still do their magic. I'm not a designer, but this is what they seem like to me sometimes. The front-end dev now, instead of just kind of implementing those, breaks up the pieces into the atoms, the molecules, and the organisms in the Storybook tool, or in the component library that the Storybook tool kind of gives you a view of. And so I mentioned the accessibility and the other kind of ability to QA this before. Now the front-end dev doesn't have to touch Drupal at all. We're using this in some of our projects. Some front-end devs really like Drupal and know it, so they can kind of go further, but this is something that really opens up a lot of possibilities in terms of working with folks that don't know Drupal or WordPress. The next step of the workflow is to do that templating in Drupal. This is something that requires kind of a pretty decent knowledge of the Drupal theme system and kind of some of the internals of Drupal. I I like this kind of image in terms of some of the Drupal structures just seem like huge monolithic things, and then I've felt like this guy just hammering away sometimes. This was definitely a learning curve for me and for our team, but we're getting a lot better at it. And I think we've kind of gotten through most of the things that we need to kind of replicate. So that's exciting. So we have a couple more minutes, and I wanted to share with you the other kind of part of the approach that we're taking to make things more reusable. So you've got the that front-end component system. On the Drupal end, we're also looking at ways of staying more flexible and to make it easier for us to add or remove types of components and to keep them as flexible as possible. So in order to do that, we want to try and not stay as tied to the name of the component. You'll see that come up again. Naming, and again, in just the utilization of these tools, it's hard to name things, and we don't want to stay tied to them. So this is something that we've done in the past, where kind of every possible permutation, we created a different kind of internal Drupal structure for. So these are paragraphs. We're using blocks a little bit more now, but the idea is the same. This limits our flexibility because the internal structure is so tightly coupled to what the expectation of the front end structure. So if the design changes just a little bit, it's hard to re-implement this. We also want to have a flexible data source. You want to have the ability to switch from a views type list to a list that is something that is something that the user is able to click together in real time. So dynamic versus manual, and you want to give the user some options to choose some of these things. So what we've done in that regard is to kind of break down the blocks that we're using into a card context and a block context. And we kind of think of this as a little bit of a Swiss Army knife approach. So we have kind of a container for a card that supports dynamic data coming from views or manual data, and the user is able to, in Layout Builder, click around and decide what their data is, and then what it's going to look like. So we're doing that like on an individual card level, and then we're doing that on a group level. The reason to have a group level is that, and when I'm saying group, I'm saying something like this carousel or any of these items that are kind of grouped together. They often just have there's often something about them, like this one, for example, the way that this card is different than these, that requires some kind of context that you can't deliver on a per card basis. So we're giving folks the ability to decide the type of group, some of the different kind of options, what the content source looks like, and what the individual item card will look like. So we're coupling this with Layout Builder to be able to allow clients to kind of have like a Wix-like experience, or Squarespace, or whatever those are. We're able to start to unlock that for clients, and the component-based approach really helps with that, because we're not designing things like for a specific page. We're designing components that can kind of fit into pages. So that's it's a different approach that really helps with this kind of end result. So yeah, this is kind of the end of that story that I started to tell earlier, in terms of like what we can deliver clients with this approach, and how we can start to improve both the UI of the Layout Builder experience, and our ability to kind of allow users to pick that stuff, as well as the individual components, improving on accessibility, improving on ways that we're able to deliver them. So some of the challenges that we've come across, again, naming things is hard. You know, is this a carousel? Do you name it after the JavaScript library? If you asked a developer, a designer, a product manager, if you asked all these groups what this is, you'd get 3 different answers. So it's most useful to have the same thing named across all the different contexts and processes that one of these goes through. But that can be really difficult. You know, is this 3? You actually saw in our template earlier that we called it 3 card. So you know, we're still going through some of these challenges ourselves. And if you ask like a developer, an implementer, they may call it a block or paragraph, because that's how they're implementing it. Working in Storybook can present some challenges. I'd say it's maybe 90% seamless, but there's a couple times where we had this one JavaScript component that relied on the HTML to be rendered before no, it relied on the CSS to size the HTML before it could do some calculations, and that experience in Storybook, because it's a React app, was different than the CMS, and I actually spent too many nights probably fixing that when so there can be a little bit of a few hiccups trying to get something exactly the same, and the card widths can be different depending on the context. So trying to make things the same can present some challenges. There's a learning curve for Storybook. There's a learning curve, as I mentioned, for the actual templating. You can kind of get a weird velocity, like in some of our when you're used to theming kind of iteratively, or actually like kind of globally first, you see things come together more progressively, whereas we can tend to have projects where it looks like there's no progress, and then all of a sudden like we're done. So that's a little bit of a learning curve there. And then some of our challenges are just around user interface. Obviously, only a developer would look at this and feel really excited. So some of our next steps are to make this much more user-friendly and to share that. And it's always a challenge too when multiple teams may be working on the same thing, just that kind of trust, team communication. So if you're interested in using this approach and you haven't yet, I would definitely recommend having like a design champion and a dev champion to help it with those learning curves, and to make it worthwhile. You definitely want to have similarities across projects. So that's 40 minutes, and yeah, that is some of what we've learned, and are really excited to both share and engage with the community around. So we're looking forward to seeing some more examples, seeing some more kind of community around this stuff, and yeah. If you have any questions, I think now is a good time for those. I assume people are here. I think the room's been muted, and I'm not 100% sure how to mute people. Is it so? If there's any questions.
Hey, Aaron, this is Chris. Just to let you know I'm here.
Great.
I don't have any questions because I've seen this with you several times.
Yes. So that's Chris, our salesperson, who I didn't give a shout out to, but obviously part of reusability comes from the sales process, being able to sell to similar.
Get downstairs. Get downstairs. Come upstairs.
Someone's upstairs.
And don't come up. Sorry about that.
No problem. So I'm not hearing any questions. I guess I'll give one more opportunity to, or if anyone has kind of thoughts or has tried some of this stuff, either in Drupal or WordPress, feel free to chime in. It doesn't sound like it. I don't mind ending a little early, especially kind of in this format. Gives folks a little time to kind of transition and get some outside time. I can actually see my daughter that I showed you earlier, she's on the swing outside, so I'm kind of excited to go visit them. But yeah, would love to hear from people in Slack. Look for some more community, kind of some public code from us. Definitely check out Emulsify. You can find me directly in Slack on the Drupal Twig channel. There's a components or Drupal Twig Slack. In Drupal Twig Slack, there's a components channel. There's a couple channels where folks are discussing this stuff. So if you're jumping in and really want to have questions that you want to answer right away, definitely that's a great place. So, all right, well, thanks so much, and I look forward to hearing from folks in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great job, Aaron.
All right, bye, Aaron.
Thank you.